drive a car, it's a system, like an operating system of a computer. They can be pre-programmed, they can be done with GPS. If you know anybody in the agricultural field, there's huge, huge developments there as well. All right, sizing applications. Right now, we have what we know as far as developments, but we know that there's the size of honeybees, right? They're getting smaller and smaller for espionage, for surveillance purposes. Tons and tons of money in the private sector and the defense spending sector developing these technologies, and also the size of our jet fighters. There's military, hobbyist, commercial. We're more concerned with hobbyists and commercial. But the applications are endless, and they continue to grow. Search and rescue, surveillance, weather, firefighting, agriculture, forest management, pipeline inspection, tower inspection, bridge inspection, delivery. Here's what we think of, I think, with UAVs historically. That's a Predator drone, and then a Global Hawk. This is a helicopter-based drone called Fire Scout, and then already now we have drones that the Marines use called a Switchblade drone that can be carried by one Marine, go up, send back real-time intelligence. Very, very useful tools. This is the drone you're probably familiar with, though. It is the DJ Phantom drone. It's basically the Nike of drones. It's super popular. It's the one all the kids want, getting cheaper and more advanced all the time. But anywhere from $15 for the kiddie stuff to $800. In many cases, they're falling fast as ramped-up production occurs in China. Already we're seeing Virginia Tech last year got clearance to deliver burritos to Virginia Tech students. So we're already seeing some delivery applications. It's more of a novelty right now. But UPS just unveiled their next model, which is going to be basically focused on serving rural communities. So one UPS truck, top slides open, the truck goes here to deliver, the drone goes over here, and you back up, back to the interstate or wherever to save tons of fuel for UPS. But this is really what's driving the debate. This is Bezos from Amazon, and that's really the next thing. And that's really what's driving the FAA's attention, frankly, at this point. Because they definitely want to put UPS out of business. I mean, they want to put the air carriers out of business if they can. They can control their own shipping. Amazon's already gotten into the airplane game. If they can get a whole handle on this, they can cut that middleman and save a lot of money. There was just a story today. Amazon is patenting these beehives that are going to be in certain places where drones can come, recharge, get goods in the next 20 years, and then deliver them from there. So it's happening very fast. All right, so some numbers real quick. It was estimated that 500,000 UAS sold in the USA for hobby and businesses in 2014. 1 million were sold in 2015. 2016, 2.5 million sold. So that's not accumulated. That's just that 1 year how many were sold. It's estimated that 7.5 million new drones will enter the U.S. marketplace in 2020. And it's going to have a huge economic impact for businesses, for both the platforms we're anticipating now and then the stuff we haven't even thought of yet. So the drone industry, very, very interested in seeing this continue more or less in check. And agriculture, if you have a chance to talk to any farmers, the ability, it's mind-blowing what they can achieve really fast with faster processing computers, increased imaging capacity and capabilities. That's really going to have a great impact not only on productivity, but also impact on the environment with localized applications of pesticides. Instead of spraying all the field, you can find through data where you need to specifically apply it. So, big stuff. All right, brief history of aviation. I also teach aviation law. So, Kitty Hawk, December 7th, 1903. That's the Wright brothers, right? That's the first manned flight in the history of humankind outside of a hot air balloon. By 1914, we had the first commercial flight. First regular transport scheduled flights for passengers was 1920. And the first transatlantic commercial flight was 1938. It moved pretty quick. It advanced really fast. We're going transatlantic by 1938 with only, 35 years before a success is a 1-minute flight on a beach in North Carolina. So, technology happens really fast, and it's happening that way with the drones. This was the previous legal maxim that controlled airspace. Prior to manned flight, whoever owns the land possesses all the space above the land extending to the heavens. That was common law based on a previous Roman maxim. But then we see federal intervention You see the Air Commerce Act 1926, Warsaw Convention 1929, 1938, Civil Aeronautics Act. And then this is where Congress declared a public right of freedom in transit and air commerce through the navigable airspace of the United States. Keep in mind, navigable airspace. And then we had the Chicago Convention on International Civil Aviation in the early 1940s that really set the standard as far as how every signatory would then implement future changes to aviation law in their own countries. And we implemented that international agreement with the Federal Aviation Act of 1958. Under this act, the federal government, the FAA, was given full responsibility and authority for advancement and promulgation of civil aeronautics generally, and they recognize that aviation is unique among transportation industries and its relation to the federal government. It is the only one whose operations are conducted almost wholly within the federal jurisdiction. Okay, so this established federal airspace, the navigable airspace. So then the question became very quickly, where does the navigable airspace begin, and what's my airspace as a property owner? Okay, and that gave us U.S. v. Cosby in 1946. Guy was a chicken farmer. They built up an air base, which was a fairly new technology at the time, and planes were flying 83 feet over his house. It was causing all his chickens to run into the building and kill themselves. And so he kept restocking his chickens. The planes kept flying low, and the chickens kept smashing their skulls. All right. So then the question is, at what level of use does it constitute a taking, right? That someone is so impacting your enjoyment of your property that it constitutes a taking. And so what came back was anything above the deemed minimum safe altitude to be in the public domain. Now the court didn't want to name an exact height, but the ruling out of this was 83 feet. That was where their tower was. That's how close they were. I mean, the facts were different. It'd be 50, but it was 83. So what they gave us was the Cosby bubble. And basically, this idea is that people's property ends at the highest of their underlying land trees, building, and fences. So if you just have a fence row, compared to a barn, compared to a windmill, that's going to be your differences, right? So that's very, what we call, I think, vague, right? And so historically, it's basically, we've had this gray area between roughly the tops of your buildings and 400 feet for helicopters, 500 feet for airplanes. Because no one else has used that space, right? There's never been a way to use it because we don't let planes fly that low for public safety reasons. So that's what navigable airspace has kind of been, generally speaking. So 500 feet for planes, 400 feet for helicopters. And so this is where we find ourselves with drone technology. FAA came out early and said, hey, in our minds, from the tops of your shoelaces all the way to the heavens, that's ours. That creates some problems. One, I think that's a very, very liberal reading of the congressional intent and their jurisdiction. But they pointed to the definition of aircraft under the statute, which is any contrivance invented, used, or designated to navigate or fly in the air, or device that is used or intended to be used for flight in the air. So that would also include paper airplanes, bullets, balloons, baseballs, and footballs, right? So I think the question remains, is this what Congress had in mind to regulate when they came up with this language? So what we had here is we kind of have a very, very quickly developing technology that's selling very rapidly, that businesses are implementing to save, to make revenues, to do great things, to innovate. And we have the federal government scrambling to keep up. So we had kind of tire patches in 2005, 7, 8, 13, 14, as far as policy statements. Section 333 came out, but finally, FAA Modernization Reform Act came out in 2012. And it tasked the FAA with the safe integration of UAVs in the national airspace no sooner, or no later than September 2015. So September 2015 comes around, and this being the federal government, nothing happens. August 2016. Just under the gun in August, just under a year later, maybe they misread it. It was August 29, 2016. They finally issued implementing guidance for drones that everyone had been waiting for. They issued Small UAS Rule 107. We'll talk about that really quick. This applies to non-commercial, this applies to commercial use, 55 pounds or less, must be registered with the FAA, requires all these different things. Includes not over any person not directly participating. You can only do it in daylight. Now you can ask for exceptions to these things, but generally speaking, these are the ground rules when you sign up. 100 mile per hour max. You got to stay under 400 feet altitude, and some of these are waivable. You also have to be a certified pilot. SIU has started to offer this course. FAA Testing Center. So all these regulations for commercial use or drones over a certain size. You get 60 years of age or older. Now, hobbyists, it's totally different. You have to abide by some special rules for model aircraft. The model aircraft community is very robust. All those guys in your family that or gals that spend way too much time building exact scale model planes and go and fly them, they're very serious in what they do. They're very organized. They've got decades worth of rules that they've put together over time and best practices. And that's what they're asking you to lean on for hobbyists. Which means that you're just doing it for fun and not for money, you're considered a hobbyist. All right, so these are the rules. Here's my point. All these rules are in place. Guess how many FAA enforcement officers we have south of I-80?
0.
We have one. We have one office in Springfield. So, the other problem is we have, depending on the year, depending on how they crunch the numbers, the 4th or 5th busiest airport in Jackson County in the state of Illinois. Okay? Because of our constant flights by our students, we are always in the top 5. So, the problem is we've got an enforcement problem. And right now, the initial state position of the FAA was we want to see everything, and now people have gotten Congress's attention, and they're trying to dial that back. Right now, we have very much a gray area, because it's the Wild Wild West. We haven't had anything settled. To give you a good example of how it's kind of been misapplied already, that 2012 Act specifically said that for hobbyists, the FAA shall not force them to register. Okay? So that was in the statute. And what do you think the FAA did? They forced them to register. So then they had all the way to go to the federal courts. The federal court said, hey guys, this is an easy one. It's very clear in the statute. This isn't allowed. So everyone's trying to find their way through this. Our concern at the airport is public safety. This is not going to be the last time you're asked to deal with this because it's a moving target. Futurists tell us that if you like beautiful, object-free skylines, take some pictures. Because in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see those fill up with drones, not only delivering, but collecting data and information to then sell. So it's going to change things. But we have to be aware because I think the position of the airport is we're on the front line of public safety. This is what we're here for, is to protect the public and make it safe. But at the same time, not overstepping our bounds with the FAA and not hampering innovation that's going to do us a lot of good potentially. So that's kind of where we find ourselves. So what we're proposing is an ordinance that encompasses the 5-mile radius of the airport. And you see that in the whereas language in the ordinance. Just here's the deal. It's the 5-mile radius. Right now we're coming up on what I'm afraid will be a perfect storm, is that we have numerous requests to the airport to come in. People want to fly in and they want to circle. That's what they're going to do. They want to be up in the air to see the solar eclipse in August. There are going to be people with the same reasoning with their drones, taking about flight for the first or second time to see what's going on. That is a recipe for disaster, I think. There's been a lot of close calls nationally as far as drone strikes. Some people are dismissive. We say, hey, we suck birds into intakes all the time, but birds aren't made of carbon fiber, right? That's a very big difference. So that's where we find ourselves. It's more of a, we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can for public safety until we get better guidance from the feds. Right now there's a Senate bill that's gotten great bipartisan support that's advocating that local governments be given up to 200 feet to regulate their own personal airspace. You're seeing Feinstein, you're seeing communities like San Francisco, and communities in the South, like everyone's on board. Interesting, like people that usually don't get along together and think the same way are coming together and say, hey, we want to have this local control. So that's my presentation. Let me show you one quick video that might kind of bring this home. Because there's a lot more things that are going to have to be talked about with our government. And I'm not saying this is a perfect fix right now. City of Carbon is looking at what zoning options they have because historically you've used some zoning to regulate aviation. I know that they're working on that as well. Hopefully our goal is to have a uniform policy, ordinances throughout the 5-mile radius so law enforcement are all on the same page. Because it doesn't do us any good if law enforcement doesn't know if it's different, they just want to know that they have the same response wherever they go. All right, so take a look at this. So, pretty, interesting kid in Connecticut on his own property, attaches a flamethrower to a drone he made, and he's roasting a turkey. All right, so, kind of interesting. How about his next project?
Deer hunting.
So this one got the FAA, the last one didn't really get the FAA's attention. This one did. The FAA subpoenaed him. They wanted to know how he made it. They wanted to have it all turned over. And it's a continuing battle in the courts because his point is, that's my backyard. Those are things I own legally. I didn't bother anybody. How is this what Congress had in mind? That's the question. So I don't have the answer on this. I just know right now we're in a gray area. And I think I would sleep better as the attorney for the airport, knowing that if something does happen, we did everything we could to ensure that there was something in place to give notification to the airport as far as who was in the air and why with what. And also to know that we had some kind of response that local law enforcement felt confident and comfortable with to police that area because we know the FAA can't. Any questions for me? Or Ed?
Is there a reason to expect that if we adopt this type of ordinance that there will be the expansion? So now talk about that one guy who's running around or gal trying to enforce these things.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, an ordinance at the city level would be enforceable by our city police.
Right.
But it still seems like it would be a very difficult thing to enforce in a sense because we talk about how small these things are.
Sure.
And if you've got one that's the size of this, gavel block or whatever, it's just difficult to see.
Yeah. Well, and normally if they're not flying line of sight, you don't even know where they're at.
Sure.
So no, it absolutely is going to be difficult to enforce. But if you have somebody that they got picture evidence of them doing it, or they're recording them doing it, it's going to be a lot easier to call Murphysboro Police and make a complaint than leaving a voicemail in Springfield.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'd also like to point out in reading through this ordinance that we do have an airport inside the city limits at St. Joseph, which is also affected by the 5-mile radius and would probably need notification as well.
Good point. Mr. Urbis, did you have something?
I was going to ask why the 5 miles?
That's what the FAA has established for this. I believe they established radiuses based on how busy they are, and that's the 5-mile radius that they have. If you go, like for instance, if you lay all the Washington D.C. area airports, like technically you're gonna have a hard time flying anywhere because it overlaps in so many places. So really, in a lot of ways, that notification requirements we're piggybacking off of what's required by the FAA, but that way it's similar, it's the same, and at least you can call somebody here locally with the same thing, because I think most law enforcement, they're going to respond and you say, hey, look, I just read on the FAA, this is what they're supposed to do, and they're not doing it. I don't think most law enforcement is going to be able to. They're going to say, okay, well, call the FAA. But if we have something that mirrors it here locally, that reflects the spirit of it, and then with a little more options for enforcement, and I think also the way it's structured, I don't think it encourages notification. It's just we're just asking to be told, where are you, so we can put it into our planning for our flights.
Where this ordinance fell with the FAA registration, because my husband has been a drone owner for few years, and I know that he had to register himself and pay, I think it was $5.
It was $5, yeah.
$5, and then he have these letters that he have to put in his drones.
Right.
Yeah, but, and we're aware of the 6 miles radius, so how these FAA regulations are not, I would say, showering us in the different towns, covering us.
Yeah.
It's not a,
Well, the registration doesn't exist anymore.
Really?
Yeah, that's what's got thrown out, because the statute said you can't make hobbyist register, and then they made hobbyist register, and the federal court threw it out. But, as far as everything else is concerned, you're still required to notify the tower, and the airport. It's just, we have no enforcement mechanism if someone's not doing that, to address any real public safety concerns or threats.
if you are within the 5-mile
Correct.
radius, that's when you notify.
Correct.
Otherwise, you
Otherwise,
are
no.
okay. Okay,
But I don't know if that's necessarily the case for your ordinance.
yeah.
Our ordinance is
Reads
written,
5
most of the city of Murphysboro isn't the cemetery, and some out in that area is beyond the 5-mile radius, but most of Murphysboro is within the airport's 5-mile radius. We wrote the ordinance to cover all of Murphysboro because we don't want chief to have to try to figure out whether this particular backyard is 5.1 miles or 4.9 miles. So we just made the city limits be the area of our enforcement.
So you cannot fly your drone anymore in town?
No, you have to register with the airport that you are flying. This is not a draconian ordinance, and it's not an ordinance that's probably gonna last very long. You guys don't know this, but I've been attending meetings with Steve and a lot of other people over at the airport, which I never charged for because I wasn't asked to do that, but I felt it needed to be done. And Steve and Carbondale City Attorney, DeSoto City Attorney, Jackson County attorneys, state's attorney, and I have all worked on these ordinances. We're trying to get an identical ordinance in the entire 5-mile radius. This is a baseline ordinance. It's gonna take us a while to figure out exactly how it's gonna operate. It's gonna take Chief a while to figure out what his duties are with it, his people's duties are with it. And probably about the time we figure out what we're doing with this document here, we'll be coming back to you with another document saying, okay, now we got, this is gonna be a growing regulatory situation. For us, our purpose and what makes us different than some people is that we are right here within the airport, 5-mile radius. And they need us to give them enforcement help. They don't have enforcement police. We do. County does, other towns do, they don't. So that's what it's about.
So as a licensed 107 pilot, if I've got a waiver to operate in the Class D airspace here within Southern Illinois Airport's airspace, what additional steps would need to be taken in engaging with local law enforcement prior to operations?
It would be my reading of the current ordinance is that it mirrors it.
Okay.
I believe that if you're following the 107,
Mhm.
you're doing this, you're already doing everything that you're supposed to as far as following your flight plan with the airport.
Okay. So in that case, it would just be verifying if local law enforcement was to approach and say, here are the steps that I followed through,
Yep.
here's verification, you get, okay.
Yeah.
So it's no additional limitations to operations or other things like that?
No,
It just
no, that's
says-
not what we want.
Gotcha.
Absolutely not, right? We just want to know where you are so we can plan for it. Because we got so many young pilots.
And this is commercial and hobbyist, correct?
Well, so yes and no. I think the way that commercial is leaning is there's less and less required, no. If it's in the 5-mile radius, they're gonna have to notify regardless.
All right.
Now,
So if, let's just use
Yeah.
UPS as an example.
Yeah.
So if they did decide that they were going to do that before they delivered anything within the city limits, basically,
Right.
they would have to notify the airport of their presence.
What's the, let me get a copy of that.
Yeah, I do. I actually made notes on the back, but,
I believe there may be some distinction.
and I
We're
may
only
have read
talking
that in
about-
there. I can't remember when I read it if there was.
250.
Okay, yeah, all right, yeah, there it is. I remember him saying that. I remember reading that.
It's not very big.
No,
Yeah.
yeah.
So about a half.
And this is why we don't want to regulate Christmas, Walgreens drones.
As far as the police enforcing, they're not, are they just gonna have to stop everybody and ask, what steps did you go through? Because they're not gonna know who contacted
Yeah,
the
how do
tower
you
and who
enforce
didn't.
it?
How do they know this?
That's gonna be how we work it out.
Theoretically, yes, but you gotta remember, FAA they have their rules, but they only have one enforcement person police force.
I'll be adding an aviation unit in the next budget.
There's a drone that
We'll
can
take
be
your
free.
certified personal check for that.
So the point being is that most of the enforcement, as this thing gets started, is gonna be in response to citizens complaining, because now they know that there is an ordinance, and so now they know they've got somebody they can complain to, and that's where it starts.
Well, and I think it's an important thing too, because if they feel like they have someone to talk to locally, they're less inclined to blow it out of the sky. Because the problem with shooting a drone out of the sky, by the FIA's definition, that's an aircraft, you get 20 years in prison.
Yeah.
So we want to discourage people, taking the law in their own hands always, and this is a way to do that if they feel there's a way to communicate.
So are we being advised by our city attorney to adopt this ordinance tonight?
Tonight, or in the next couple meetings, we'd like the group that's been working on this would like to have this in place in the whole 5-mile area before we get to our. How many airplanes did you say are already registered to land in Carbondale?
It was, I think it was scores. I mean, it was,
200, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they were calling in saying, we're gonna be down here because we want to circle during the eclipse at ground zero. And so that's what we're concerned about.
In looking through it, I do have some mechanics questions that I would like to talk to the airport police about, run by Ed. There's a lot of questions I see just reading through, because I only got it yesterday.
So you would.
If you guys could hold off to the next council, I would appreciate it, because there's some mechanics and enforcement, and the complaints are gonna come to us, and I see about 7 or 8 off the top of my head that I need to get some clarification on and put some mechanics in place.
That's why Steve's here today instead of next month, so we can get this thing in the hopper, and it doesn't have to be done tonight. We would like to have it done. It's gonna be done before the
All
end
right,
of
well,
July.
I would suggest that we would hold this item until the next agenda and consider it further at that time.
Okay.
Mr. Boss, thank you so much for your presentation.